before you actually go to the registration part, which I'll go into what is required to do a registration, but you really need to know what is it that you want to address. What is this that is actually, what is the problem that you are solving if you want to start an NPO, and how you're going to go about that. And then you need to also know that why is it important, because you need to be relevant.
To start an NPO, who really qualifies, and what are the cost implications?
Anybody who's above 18 years can qualify to register an NPO.
Okay.
I think as long as you know what is it that you want to address by starting that NPO.
Yeah.
So that's the basic thing.
Right.
You have to have a whole sustainability plan in place. What is that you want to do?
What does that look like?
That looks like when you go back to the question that the donor want to know, how you're going to sustain yourself.
Yeah.
So despite looking for funding, what else are you doing? What else are you doing? If you are a community project that is growing vegetables, of course, you'll be selling the vegetables, but you're also looking for funding, but you also have this project that generates funds for us.
Yeah.
The Groundbreakers, Mondays to Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. on TUTFM.
And it is that time once again where we begin to have more serious conversations. I always say we bring the top of the tree, and whether you are talking finance or any other space. And today we are talking non-profit organization, and of course we are exploring the journey to starting one. Yeah. What mistakes are we making? It's going to be a broad conversation. You might have an NPO yourself. If you are in and around Soshanguve, you might be excited as well about the guest that we have, because, well, she is from Soshanguve, I'm told. So many of you might be listening. Listen, if you have a question, please send us those. Already start writing down. It's 012-382-9257. That's our WhatsApp. Start sending any question, NPO, right? And listen in. Our guest tonight is Belinda Mogashwa. She is the executive director of, I love the name, Bongwanake Foundation. And I was told something, maybe she will tell us about the name, right? What goes into a name? Does it matter? Perhaps if my application is being assessed, what I say, Babolaying, for example, as a name. Does it impact what's in a name? But I found it totally homely that she chose this particular name. She's sitting here with me. In a moment I'll bring her. Of course, for those who are watching on our YouTube channel, you must be seeing her, I suppose, by now. And well, let's bring in our guest here, Belinda. Thank you so much for honoring this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the opportunity.
There you go. And normally when I have conversations with people, I'm on the other side. To be sitting next to you here makes it more like we are at home and sitting back having a conversation over Christmas lunch, for example. But there's no Christmas here. It's serious. We are talking NPOs. Before I bring her into this difficult conversation, having spent 23 years in that field, she would know. She's an NPO, basically an NPO walking. So if you want to understand how that works, she's in studio with us. But Miss Belinda Mogashwa grew up in Soshanguve, as I said earlier on, and went to the Tabanem Primary School, then to Letabong High School. She went to Vista University for her undergraduate degree. She also studied at the University of Pretoria and TUT Business School. She's the eldest in her family with 6 siblings, 2 departed. She's a mother and a grandmother. Well, she doesn't look like one, I can tell you. She's also the founding director of Bongwanake Foundation, founded in 2018. Now, her formal career life started in 1997 when she was amongst the first cohort of National United Nations volunteers, and was seconded to the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights as a project officer for the Southern African Student Volunteers, SASVO. Her fundraising experience started when she was appointed as a national project coordinator in 2000, where she started fundraising for all projects in the 7 provinces alongside the director. During her years as a project officer and the coordinator, she managed student work camps in Limpopo, Mozambique, Uganda, and Tanzania. She was also responsible for the UK SA Volunteer Exchange Program. In 2001, she represented a paper on volunteering and social inclusion, the South African perspective at the International Year of the Volunteer Symposium in Geneva, Switzerland. 2002, she was invited to the Second World Assembly on Aging in Midrand, Spain, making her representation on family, community, and older persons intergenerational relationships. She also worked for the following organization: Foundation for Human Rights as a project officer, the U.S. Embassy, U.S. Peace Corps as an associate director, African World Heritage Fund, UNESCO as head of resource mobilization and international relations, CHOC, CHOC Regional Fundraising Events and Relationship Coordinator. She's also worked at the University of Pretoria as a Senior Development Specialist. Her work experience from being a fundraiser and also a grant maker has enabled her to get a good understanding of both sides of the table as a grant seeker and a donor. She served on various boards in the NGO sector. As part of her job as a fundraiser and community development specialist, she has been to India, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Madagascar, Costa Rica, France, UK, Ethiopia, as well as Zimbabwe. For 5 years, Belinda worked for herself as a fundraising consultant for various non-governmental organizations and also establishing her own NPO. Wow, this is very rich. This is quite rich. So you've been to Spain too? Huh? You are well traveled, obviously, around the country, and it is that perhaps maybe at one stage where I'll squeeze how NPOs are being treated in other countries. You've been to Rwanda, you've been to Uganda, you've done a lot of work as compared to how we're dealing with those in South Africa. That question is coming in. The executive director of Bongwanake Foundation, they say we see the children first, but they've seen TUTFM first, and they are here in studio with us tonight. Let's start on the conversation. We are exploring the journey of starting a non-profit organization. Well, firstly, let's start here. Who is Mam Belinda? I've written a number of things here, but it's only proper to hear from you as we lay a foundation to what should be a very, very fruitful discussion here tonight. Who's Mam Belinda? We'll get to the NPO part.
Okay. Like you've indicated, Belinda is a mother. It's a grandmother. I'm a social entrepreneur. Yes. I'm a development specialist. By saying that, it means I'm more into fundraising, just general project management as far as NPOs are concerned, and yes, also assist with specialized in assisting upcoming and new NPOs on capacity building.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
So that's basically who I am. So I am very passionate about the sector. Mm-hmm. It was actually a journey that I found myself in. I mean, I graduated, and when I started, I actually wanted to become a teacher or a psychologist. So I majored in both education and psychology. But, life paths will redirect you, and sometimes if you really don't know your passion, you'll be pushed towards your passion. And I think that's what happened with me. Because after I graduated, I actually worked at a printing shop.
Okay.
Yeah, as a shop manager there, and I assisted. When you start graduating, whatever comes, you just want to work. I mean, my family circumstances didn't allow me to just idle and find an ideal job. Yeah. So I worked there. That's when I met the lady who was working for the UNDP at the time. Okay. And as we were printing, I saw a document that are looking for graduates to start on this program. At that time, the United Nations were having a first cohort of the UNVs, which were United Nations volunteers. Yes. So we're being seconded to various programs and projects, and I was seconded to the University of Pretoria to work on work camps. And strange enough, I was allocated Limpopo as a project. My first project was actually to upgrade and renovate a center for children living with disabilities at the time. Okay. Not knowing that's going to be actually where my path will lead, but that's where I started my life in an NPO till to date.
Sure. Did you know those experiences may have shaped you for ultimately what you are now doing? In going through all these jobs, you started off printing. How did these experiences actually, do you think in any way they shaped who you are?
I think they did. In a way, they did. they shaped actually my career life in a way.
Yeah.
But I also still find myself teaching a lot. I haven't been in front of a classroom, but I think that's something that is within me. So I find myself teaching a lot.
Yeah.
And then the psychologist in me also still pops out once in a while. But yeah, but the work that I did actually shaped what I'm doing today, because I started off from the university at that time. I worked with a non-profit organization in Limpopo, trying to build capacity, assisting with. We were doing a lot of infrastructure. It was work camps that we did with students. We would put them through the holidays to go and upgrade and renovate schools, building classrooms, building toilets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that actually got me my first glimpse of the actual real world of the NPO, of non-profits or NGOs at the time.
Yeah.
So that's where actually I started, and actually where I started realizing where your passion lies. Sometimes you're expecting to have a glass of juice, and you're given milk and you taste and you feel like, actually I like milk.
Ah, yes.
You know,
Yes.
I think that's what happened with me. That's how it all started.
Great stuff. So that led you to the organization. I'm interested in that as well. Bongwanake Foundation. When was it established, and what was the purpose behind that?
Well, Bongwanake Foundation, I'm very passionate about children, first of all. As the name says, Bongwanake Foundation. Actually, we had a project prior to that where it was called Volunteer Venture SA. It was more based on volunteer work. That's the work that we did. And we also had a center under Volunteer Venture, which was called Wings of Hope. But after COVID, when we relaunched, we go look into the foundation, where Wings of Hope is still the flagship project of the organization, where we still have a center for children living with disability. Yeah. It's a 24-hour care facilities that we have. But with Bongwanake, as the name says, it says our children. It's a Tshwane name. Actually, I had an uncle who used to say Bongwanake Bagai, so I sort of fell in love with the name. And so as our motto says, we see the child first. It's all about children.
Yes.
So we're not only looking at children with disabilities, but we're also looking at children. We're trying to raise awareness on childhood cancer. Yeah. We know it's done out there, but we see there's a big gap also in the market to raise awareness on that. And also now with the fourth industrial revolution and then artificial intelligence, we now going into robotics and coding for kids. So that's also another program that we actually want to look into and say, we need our kids to actually not be left behind in the for our world, but we really need them to do that. So we have a pilot that we're working on robotics and coding for kids, but we're also looking at sports and recreation, where we can support local sporting clubs and all of that. So we're not only looking at implementers. As a foundation, our main aim, our long-term goal is actually to go and be able to support other organizations that are doing similar work instead of us implementing, but we also want to be donors in future to be able to support our local NGOs that are doing particular work, and also to empower and strengthen the children's sector. And build capacity.
Let's now start and get into the crux of the matter, and maybe before we get to that, do you allow people to, because running an organization and getting the experience, you've gotten some experience over 23 years, do you have opportunities perhaps within your foundation where people who are young may come in and get to learn? Do you have programs around that as well?
Like I say, we don't have a program around that, but I personally mentor a lot of young people who actually want to get a certain experience. Like people who want to start NGOs would come to me and say, this is what I want to do. And then we had a lot of young nurses or student nurses that would say, I want to gain some experience. We can actually place them with that and do that kind of work with us. But we're not a very big NGO. Like I said, we just also recently launched. And, but in future, we're actually looking into going into that area and saying, but not wanting to lose focus, we are for children. Anything that has to do with children, if you want to do something related to that, we'll definitely be able to accommodate you.
So what is an NPO?
NPO, it's a non-profit organization, as I say in full. It's a legal entity that is actually formed by a group of people or a person that can actually say, I want to start this, but as required by the law, it's not something that you can start alone. You need to have people to come with you. So it's basically about a group of people coming together to wanting to address a particular societal issue or to promote a certain matter within the community. So it's basically about addressing certain social objectives.
Is it in any way completely different to an NGO, or are these the two things?
Actually, they're the same things. and they're also different in a way.
Okay.
Because when it all started, the NPO is a very recent name. We all knew it was about NGOs.
Yes.
Maybe it was NGO, and let's say the same thing that say, and it was NPO. Now we have NPCs, which actually they all do the same thing. It's just that if you differentiate between the two now, is that with an NPO, it might be a smaller organization. Okay. The scope is very limited as to what you do. But with NGO, you get bigger organizations that are actually doing international work. They get international funding. You get NGOs that are actually funded by international organizations. For example, most of them, they are advocacy groups. They might be standing for a certain particular, fighting for rights of children, fighting for the rights of children with disabilities, or but it will be an advocacy group most of the time.
Sure.
And if heavily funded. Sometimes it's actually created by the interest of a particular donor to say this is what we want to address as a country. They're mostly advocacy group. Those are the ones that you might find actually holding government accountable.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, so that's the difference. But they're all non-profit. But it's just that now with NGO, you get local NGOs, you get international NGOs. Your Oxfam, your Save the Children. Those are not international NGOs, but they're still NGOs.
Yes.
Because the scope is wide and it's big.
Sure.
But they were all when all started, it was NGOs, but that name came, and then we had non-profit, which is more on a smaller scale, where you have your community-based organization, your faith-based organization. You know, those will be your non-profits.
I know
they basically do the same thing.
I know that individually
we
might have different intentions and purposes for why we would want to have an NPO, for example, or an NGO. Yeah. But generally, what was the whole purpose behind having an NPO? What is the importance of having an NPO, broadly speaking here?
Like I said, it's all about wanting to address a specific issue or societal matter, or wanting to, say, impact, create a positive impact in the community. That's all we're all about. But then there's a whole lot of other things that one needs to consider when starting an NPO, because it's not only just about passion. Of course, passion takes you to get to what you want, but there's a whole lot of other things that need to be taken into consideration when you start an NPO.
What are those?
Yeah.
What are those? What do you take into cognizance?
Yeah, maybe first of all is about the registration, because it's also regulated under the law.
Okay.
So when you start an NPO, you need to register that. But before you even get to that point, because sometimes somebody will say, I want to register an NPO, and then find out what is it that is needed to be done, and you have a registration, and you get that done, and you realize it's actually not that easy as well. But then once that is done, and you start thinking, what do I really want to do? I think it should be the other way around, because before you actually go to the registration part, which I'll go into what is required to do a registration, but you really need to know, what is it that you want to address? What is this that is actually, what is the problem that you are solving if you want to start an NPO, and how you're going to go about that?
Sure.
And then you need to also know that why is it important? Because you need to be relevant. I must have a rationale. Why am I starting what I'm starting, and what do I hope to achieve? And how am I going to get there?
Sure.
What skill set do I need? And then if you say you want to address a drug problem, are you just going to go out there, you want to do awareness? Or you want to create a rehabilitation center? What does it take to put that kind of infrastructure in place? So those are some of the things that you really need to look into. And then, of course, like I say, passion do play a role, but it's not the only thing. It's the same thing as Mjolo.
Okay. All right. Let's take a very quick break. I see my screen is flashing. Then we take a quick break. We're back into show. We are exactly 4.5 minutes away to the news. Pololo Madisa will step in at that particular time. But in case you are wondering, or you've just walked in, I'm in conversation now with Belinda Mogashwa, who is the Executive Director of Bongwanake Foundation. And we are exploring the journey of starting an NPO. So before we go to the news, Mama Khasha, let's talk about, you were talking about the registration part, how important this is. What are the requirements if I want to register an NPO?
Okay, first of all, when you want to register an NPO, you need to have your board. Those are the first people that you have, because when you fill your application form, you need to have your board members, people that you select as board members for your organization. And then I just want to I'll go back to the board, and then you have to have a founding document, which will be your constitution in this case. So you need to have a constitution which will outline how you're going to manage the organization, what are your objectives, and what are the responsibilities of the board, how are you going to manage your finances, what's going to happen should the organization be dissolved. So those are some of the things you need to put into your constitution. But also what I've seen also people doing when they're selecting the board, because that's a requirement when you fill that NPO registration form, you need to have a board. People will just go and pick friends and somebody because you have the names on there.
Quick.
And that's also a create a challenge, because when you create something as important as starting an NPO that's going to address an important matter, you need somebody who will add value to your organization. Get people who share the same passion, who understand the road that you're heading, so that they can actually be able to work with you. So we make a mistake of just getting people in so that as long as there's ID numbers and names and addresses, it's there. And after that, they fall off and then you're on your own, and it's another struggle. But if you have people that actually can share the journey with you, it's very important. Of course, when you start, because sometimes you can start that as a group, which is a shared ideas, but sometimes you can start as one person, say, this is what I want to do, but I need people to work with me. That's why it's very, very important. We're actually going to say, who do I want to walk this journey with? So you have to really get the right people. What skills do you need from your board? Because you have people that are saying they're board members, but they're not adding any value to the organization. They're not helping the organization in any way. You need to have somebody who's got financial skills, financial management skills, who can actually be able to advise on how to go about that, even if you have a financial manager, because your board members, remember, they are overseers. So you need somebody who's got to have a fundraising skill. You need somebody who can be able to help you and advise on, say, this is what you can do if you want to do fundraising. You need somebody who can actually be able to say, I'm good at management, general management. So you look at the kind of skill sets that you get, not only as part of your staff, but start with your board. And if you have your board, it's amazing the kind of contribution they can make, and the easy way that you can be able to do the work that you want to do. So that's very important when you select the board. I just wanted to highlight on that. So you have your board, and then you submit the documents to the Department of Social Development. And once you do that, you're going to get, when everything is approved, you're going to get your NPO number. But it doesn't end there. As soon as you get your NPO number, you have to go and register with SARS to get your public benefit organization. Remember, the organization is for public benefit. So you need to get registered for that, so that whoever gives you money can also be able to get tax exemption. Because it's also to make sure that you're not for profit, so you don't have to pay tax. Exempt you from that as well as a non-profit. I think those are
We'll probe those individually, even in terms of the constitution. That's where I'm interested in terms of understanding whether the constitution, does it matter how I formulate my constitution? Is it scrutinized, or does it not matter? I mean, what goes into my constitution?
It does matter. It does matter, because you have to tell the department who you are, who you're about, and then who's your board. That we've dealt with. But you also have to indicate the objectives of the organization. What is it that you want to achieve as an organization? You have to put it in the constitution. And how you're going to manage your finances. And then when is your year end? That also goes into the constitution. And the nicest part about doing the constitution for an NPO is the Department of Social Development has got a template that can actually guide you. You just have to fill in, and you don't have to start everything from scratch. Just fill in, or you put in your objectives, the purpose, what is that you want to do, your year end, your management, and assets, how you're going to manage your assets, or how you're going to give away your assets if you have redundant assets. There's a clause that will stipulate you're not going to share some of the assets amongst yourself as board members, but it will require you to identify a similar organization to donate that to. That should also go into the constitution, because remember, you're non-profit. So so those are the
a lot of things to explore, including the fact that by a non-profit organization, does it mean it doesn't make profit? We'll get into that. We'll also talk about your relationship with the government. We've had a lot of stories coming from the social development. We'll also talk about mistakes that people commit in the process of applying for that. We'll talk about challenges, what donors are looking for. There's a funding part as well, the skill set, a whole lot more to talk about just after the hour 8. But now, though, Polelo Madisa is straining at the leash, chomping at the bit. It's news time. We are into the second and the last hour. By the way, this is Plug a Graduate on a Wednesday. We are TUTFM, and thank you so much for having spent time with us. Whether you are listening on 96.2, we appreciate that. For those who are listening from far afield, of course, you are listening on www.TUTFM96.2.co.za. Otherwise, on Facebook, we are TUTFM96.2. On WhatsApp, you can send us a WhatsApp if you do have a question. It's 012-382-9257. On both Instagram as well as X, formerly Twitter. We are TUTFM_96.2. I'm Obakeng Aubrey Moeketsi. I am your host. You and I will stay together up until the hour 9. And joining me in studio for a very fruitful discussion, I do have Belinda Mogashwa, the Executive Director of Bongwanake Foundation. And we are exploring how you can start your own organization, an NPO, the right way. Follow the right laws. There are laws, as Belinda was telling us, there are laws that govern that particular space. So let's get into this particular part, because after this we're getting into pretty much the deeper C part of our conversation. Is who qualifies, Sis Belinda, for a NPO, to start an NPO? Who really qualifies, and what are the cost implications?
Anybody who's above 18 years can qualify to register an NPO.
Okay.
I think as long as you know what is it that you want to address by starting that NPO.
Yeah.
So that's the basic thing.
Right.
Everybody does qualify.
Everybody does qualify. I'm sure you are listening. You are 18 years.
Legal age of 18 years.
Maybe you thought you didn't qualify. It could be an answer to you. Yes, you do. You qualify. You can start tomorrow, except you have to listen. You may have taken some few notes in terms of, it doesn't start with just qualify, and it doesn't end there either. There are processes that you need to follow to be able to get there. One of the issues that is often spoken about, which I've seen you being involved in, is the issue of volunteering. I mean, how important is it for me, for somebody who harbors any aspirations and ambitions in the future, to start an NPO, to perhaps come to you and say, Mam Khashwa, can I learn from you? Can I stay here? I want to start an organization in 3 years, but I want to work with you, volunteer my time with you, and learn the ropes from there. How important is volunteerism if you want to get into that space, though?
Volunteerism is actually very, very important. Because that's actually where you get your experience.
Yes.
It's like more of your practicals in a way.
Yes.
So you get experience. And there's different ways that people volunteer. Remember, people would want to volunteer because they have enough time at their hands and they want to do something good with their time.
Exactly.
With their time. That's number one.
Yeah.
And number two is also because there is a particular cause that they are that is very close to their heart, they're passionate about, and then just want to become part of that.
Sure.
And another part of that is somebody who's actually want to gain experience, want to get skills, want to learn new things or related to what they do, so that they can gain that experience. Because you know, when you go to the job market, it's all about experience.
Yeah.
So you have those three kind of volunteers. It's out of what they want to do, they have time in their hands, it's about the passion that they have, but also about learning to get skills. But going the other way around is looking also at how do organizations manage those volunteers.
Yes.
It's quite a way where they really need to have actually a whole volunteer management program.
Okay.
And that is something that most of the non-profit organizations actually miss out when it comes to volunteering, because you don't want somebody who come into an organization and actually make them just a runner.
Yeah.
You should actually impact their life. They should actually learn from the organization. They should also add value to the organization. That is why there's a whole process. I think that's another topic for another day, where you go through the whole process of how do you manage volunteers? When do you need volunteers?
Yes.
When can you hire or can you fire volunteers? Do you have volunteer policies in place? You know, you have those are a whole lot of other things that you know when it comes to volunteering. So you don't want to get somebody because they say they're free and then they come there, but by the time they leave the organization, you haven't benefited much or they haven't benefited anything. It should be a two-way relationship.
You seem to suggest it's a topic for the other day. I'm going to ask you to get into that briefly, though. How do you manage these volunteers? And by the way, you've raised a critical point. So you can fire volunteers too?
Well, I won't say if you can maybe fire or can release them, maybe because we haven't employed them, but maybe you can release them. Because that's what is important, because it doesn't mean somebody, when they come into the organization to volunteer, they can do whatever they like. That is why you need to have rules. There should be responsibilities for the volunteers.
Yeah.
And then you have to have a whole list of responsibilities for your volunteers, so that they know. More like at work, you have a job description. You need to have a volunteer responsibility sheet where they also know what their rights are, what the responsibilities are as volunteers within an organization. They should know how the organization works, what is expected of them, and you should also tell them what you expect from them. and you have to have a volunteer policy in place.
Sure.
Because it's not just about just doing, that will include all those rights, all those responsibilities, the duty lists, which is your job description, what is it, the hours that they need to work for the organization. It's not like when they're bored, they can just come in and go. Because if you have volunteers roaming around, there also can be a distraction. You really need to have a structured program when you have to work with volunteers. And you should be able to also know your capacity. If my organization can only take 2 volunteers at a go, I only need 2 volunteers. Doesn't matter if I have 10 people. It's not going to help me. It's actually going to be a burden for me to have a whole lot of volunteers if I'm a small organization and I have volunteers running around or just not knowing what to do. You should actually be able to have all those systems in place so that when you have volunteers, you know what they're for.
And I think you're mentioning quite an important point with regard to that, the programs that NPOs should actually have. A lot of people seem to think, what am I doing? I'm bored, so I can go and volunteer. There are responsibilities expected of you as a volunteer. Yes. So let me go to the government relations. Then a lot of people are saying, well, even to this point, I was raising an issue with you earlier on to say, does the government take NPOs as an extension of the government's work, or are NPOs under total control of the government? And I'm raising that question because we've had issues where funds were given to organizations or NPOs on the basis of the affiliations perhaps with certain political parties, if you can, and sometimes if you don't have that level of connection, it doesn't materialize. I mean, does the government take NPOs seriously, and how do we understand NPOs? As an extension of the government's work or under the government?
Remember, the work of the non-profit organization is actually an extension of the work that the government is doing. Basically, what we do, we're actually supplementing or complementing the work of the government. And then I would say the government does take NPO seriously. That's why we register with the government to do that. That is why it's all these regulations within the government, and that is why there's funding for most of the NPOs. Not all NPOs that get funding from government, but they also do funding for that. That is why there's also regulations on other issues with government. Of course, there's an issue of corruption. That is also something that, that will always happen. But answering your question, government does take NPO seriously. That is why we have all the structures within government that actually specifically are to work with NPOs. So social workers, if you work with children, you'll be assigned a social worker. If you have a residential area where children stay at your center, there's certain rules that the government will making sure that everything is put in place. Of course, there are incidences where things are not put in place and when people died and all that, but the government does have a whole list of compliance issues that you need to comply with. So they do take the NPO serious because we are the extension of what they're doing. We actually,
So if somebody was to wake up tomorrow and say, I want to register an organization, seeing I'm qualified, maybe they are 19, where do they start? The social development office, what's the first door I knock on?
The first door on, you don't even have to go there. It's also just to go into the website of social development to see what are the requirements, because there's a whole list of forms and requirements or is it that you need to register. But like I say, it's not only about doing the paperwork. What's in your heart? What is that you want to do? What need have you identified? Because passion alone, you have to do your homework. Passion on its own is not. You have to do your homework. Know exactly what is that you want to do. You can't just be all over the place. You can't just say, when I want to register, I'm going to say I want to do youth. They want you to specify exactly what is that you want to do for youth. Do you want to address drug abuse, or do you want to address unemployment, or do you want to address, social skills or entrepreneurship, or all three? But you have to be able to identify exactly what is that you want to do. Because we've seen people who actually went and registered NPO because somebody told me, quickly go and register an NPO, there's money for this. And then you go there and there's money, and after that money is gone out, the NPO is gone. And then you find that the NPO that actually, the organization that actually doing the actual work could have gotten that money and actually created a whole lot of impact. But some of the things, but it's a lot of work that has to go into it.
And I suppose the impact of that is, if you look at the life Esidimeni, for example, as an example, is that the problem with that is, with these people chowing money whoever they are and going closing doors, it leaves the very people they were intended to serve in a lurch.
Exactly.
And that is quite a concern. Now, in terms of the future of NPOs, a lot of people are saying, well, the market is changing. Maybe in future we're not going to need NPOs. How's the future looking?
It's looking bright.
Okay.
And it's becoming more professional and it's becoming more challenging.
Yeah.
But NPOs are not going anywhere. As long as we've got societal problems, as long as there's work that the government does, the non-profit sector will always have space.
Sure.
So there is future for the non-profit.
She's saying it's looking blindingly bright. Well, she didn't say that, but she's saying it's looking bright. The mistakes committed by a lot of NPOs, though, have you seen something in that space? Some of the frequent mistakes being committed by NPOs?
Yeah, some of the, especially when starting an NPO, because that's what you're talking about. It's about, like I say, there's a lot of passion. You be passionate about something, but it's not only about that. You need to do your homework.
Yes.
You need to be clear about your vision.
Sure.
What is it that you want to do? You know, and you should actually know who you are all about.
Right.
So that you know exactly what is it, who you are, what is that you want to do, and then also be able to see what does success look like for me.
Sure.
If I do this and I get it off the ground, for me to say I'm successful, what is it that I'm supposed to have done?
Yeah.
So you need to be able to look at that, and you need to have your vision, your mission. You know, you have to have your objectives. Be able to say, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things, and then it's not only just registering and starting to do it, but also you need to also think about how are you going to generate income. Because now, as much as a whole lot of NGOs are getting funding from government, but you know the challenges that goes with that.
Yeah.
But what other avenues are you going to look into when it comes to getting revenue for your organization? What is it?
Yeah, we do have a number of questions that are coming in, but before we get to that, though, talk to us about the challenges that one could potentially face in the process of trying to start an NPO.
Like I say, it's funding. It's some of the challenges, because somebody might think, you'd see one NPO that is very successful saying, I'm also going to start mine. And you hit the ground, you do the registration, you do all of that, and you realize it's not as easy as I thought.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very difficult. It's not an easy road, but you need to be able to prepare for all those kind of things to say, this is what I need to do. Because grants don't just come automatically. You go look for them. Do you know how to write your grant proposal properly?
Yeah.
Do you know who to approach? Because it's not because you got funding from this organization, I can write to that organization. Do they fund what I do? You need to be able to know who funds what I do.
Does my vision resonate with
exactly?
What, sure. So let's talk now to go ahead. I don't want to cut anything you say. I think it's important.
Yeah, so now that it's just that like some of the mistake, people don't think beyond the excitement.
Yeah.
So that's what you need to do. If you're going to do fundraising, what is your plan? There's a whole plan that you need to put together as far as fundraising. What is your fundraising plan? Who are your potential donors, like I've indicated previously?
Sure.
And another thing is also to guard about, because if you know who you are, you're not going to be donor-led or government-led or prospect-led. What I mean about that is sometimes, like I say, you're looking at a program that wants to do drug abuse, and somebody says there's money. You know, people that are making orphanages, there's a whole budget that came out in 2024 for orphanages. Yeah. And you go and run and you do what you say, now I'm going to run to do an NPO. You should know who you are, stand your ground, and don't be donor-led. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be flexible. If you're working with youth and somebody says, now that you already have youth that you're working with, this is also what you want to do. Yeah. You can actually consider that, but how will it benefit, or how is it going to impact or affect the overall mission of your organization?
Great point. Listen, a number of questions are coming in. Sello from Pretoria North. We've seen your question coming in. Letoonolo Radebe is in Block BB. Your question will come in. Sit tight, because I'll fire those to the guest who's in studio. Julius Morage from Pretoria West. I see you've also asked a question, so sit tight as well. Your answer is coming in. Mohau Siboka from Winterfeld also with a question, and a couple of other things that are coming in. If you want to have your question answered too, you can do like Sello Letohono and many others have done by just simply sending a WhatsApp 012-382-9257. We take a break. We're back. Come back from a quick break. We are into the last 30 minutes of this particular show, and without much further ado now, let me start firing some of the questions that came in. Sello from Pretoria North is asking here, is it possible for someone to make a living out of an NPO or an NGO? Perhaps that confusion is from what you said, that they are not strikingly different, but can someone really make a living out of this?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yes, you can. I mean, it's like I say, you have as a non-profit organization, because people think it's such a casual thing, you have to treat it like a business.
Yeah.
Where you actually employ people. If you have to manage big funds, you need a financial manager. So somebody, obviously, it will be their career.
Yeah.
If somebody has to manage a particular project, you need a project manager who knows what they're doing. You know, I mean, sometimes you start small as volunteers, but as you grow as you grow within an organization, you need a certain expertise within an organization, which means it will be salaried people. It will be people who actually are building their careers. I mean, I didn't start as a fundraiser, but today I'm experienced. I'm a specialist in the field because I've grown without the profession.
Sure.
And you get training as you go along. So, of course, you can make a living. Look at all those NPOs that are out there. I'm not talking about overnight, fly-by-night NPOs, but serious people that want to address issues, that care about the society, who really want to make a difference and create impact. You can make a living.
But obviously, quite apart from making a living, Selo, you need to be warned. We were told you need to think outside making a living in a space like that.
Yeah. What I can say to that is making a living, meaning if you work for an NPO, especially the fact that you rely on donor funding.
Yeah.
That is why you have to understand where you're going to get your funds from.
Sure.
I mean, if you run out of money, how are you going to get your salary? How are you going to implement your projects?
Sure.
So that is why it's very, very important when you start a project, you have to have a whole fundraising plan.
Sure.
So now that the government is giving me this amount of money, but I need to go out into the corporate sector. I need to approach foundations and trust and international foundations as well to actually be able to have us. To let us be able to have enough surplus funds, because we have bigger NGOs or non-profits that actually have got what you call it endowment funding. You find that my projects, actually the amount that I have, I need 100,000 and 900,000 or $1 million to run a project. But because of funding, maybe with what you do, you find donors that say, okay, I have these funds, I can give you as an endowment fund, which is money that you can put aside for rainy days, actually can put as an investment. Non-profits today have investment account. You have to run this as a project, as a business. A normal business, we'd call it an economic business, but this is a social business, and you have to think like a business person. It's got its challenges, of course. Like if you have a job, people get retrenched because the company is making losses or they don't know. The same thing with NPO. If we don't have enough funds, we might have to cut down on people. Sometimes, depending on whatever issues that happens, NGOs just get dissolved, and sometimes because of mismanagement and all those kind of things. But think like a business. Treat it like a business. You'll make a career out of it.
There you go. But what are donors? You've spoken to a number of donors. You sat with them, wined and dined with them. You would know their thinking processes. What are donors really expecting?
First of all, they want to know who you're all about. If you have really thought through your project, if you are really have proper structures. But one of the things that come out also, it also goes to addressing what I just said now about being able to have a long life of an NPO.
Yes.
They want to know, what is your sustainability plan?
Yes.
Should you not have funding, how are you going to, or if they say we're giving you this money, if these funds run out, how are you going to continue? How are you going to sustain the work that you do? So they want you to have a sustainability plan.
Sure.
That is why on these days it's very, very important for non-profits also to be able to say, we can also create an income generating project within the organization. And then that will be one of the reasons is, even if it's non-profit, but it's not profit, it's income generating.
Right.
Where actually it will ensure our sustainability, that should we run out of funds, we will still have this income coming.
Sure.
And we also have this pool of donors that we're also approaching. So that's why you can't be comfortable to say, I got funding from the government. You'll be surprised. And
you mentioned quite an interesting point, because you've said once those funds run out, you need to have an alternative in terms of how you take the organization forward. But what do you suggest are the proper ways then to keep my NPO self-sustainable, self-sufficient?
Like I say, you have to have a whole sustainability plan in place. What is that you want to do?
And what does that look like?
That looks like that, when you go back to the question that the donor want to know, or how you're going to sustain yourself.
Yeah.
So despite looking for funding, what else are you doing? What else are you doing? If you are a community project that is growing vegetables, of course, you'll be selling the vegetables, but you're also looking for funding, but you also have this project that generates funds for us.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you can do as an organization, you can also charge for your services. I mean, if you have an expert within the organization that actually can do, say, fundraising or assist organizations with capacity building, run workshops.
Sure.
Train other organizations at what you're good at. You know, those are some of the things that actually also create sustainability. Also forming partnerships and collaboration. If you work with other like-minded organizations, it's much easier to actually amass funding, because donors these days want to see partnerships and collaborations within non-profit organizations.
Listen attentively, because here's your question coming up. He's out in Block BB and he's asking, please inform us about the factors that motivated you to start Bongwanake Foundation.
I love children, first of all.
Sure.
And then because I've been in this space, I've worked with organizations that work with children. And then because, like I said, it's something that I was sort of automatically led towards because of, in my nature, I really love children. And the reason I started the organization is because I saw the gaps in the sector, especially when you're looking at our Center for Children Living with Disabilities. There are a lot of centers there. Yeah. But we also realize that we need to create a center that can actually provide a wraparound support for these kids. We don't just want them to come in and then we look after them, we feed them. But what else do they need? You need to explore what other things can they do. You need to be able to say they also need physiotherapists. It's not only going to get that when they go home. How are you going to make sure that they get that all wraparound support? Sure. But for me, like I say, it's all about children. So always wanted to do something for children.
You're motivated.
I'm motivated by children. And then I think one of the things is, if you can look at things the way children look at things, you realize things aren't that bad. So I've always, sometimes when I feel like I'm frustrated or that, I'll think of my grandchild, like, what will Ulebogeng say about this? And that's also another thing. But it's because of maybe my closest nature with children. I love children. I've always worked with children. I've worked for Childhood Cancer Foundation, it was children. I've worked with services for people with disabilities, which were looking for children, after children as well. I have worked projects in Limpopo, where actually my first one was about children that living with disabilities. I've worked project with built schools in Mozambique for primary school kids, and that has always been, there's so much that you can do for children, and if you start them at an early age, the reason I say we see the child first is, you don't see the disability, you don't see the poverty, you don't see the illness, you don't see an abused child. You see the child. And as a child, what can I do to explore and make sure that this child actually reaches their full potential? So for me, that is the biggest thing.
Wow. How powerful is that answer? Now, Julius Morage from Pretoria West is asking, perhaps somebody who is vacillating between two ideas and maybe want to get a bit of advice here, say, if you had to start a completely new NPO, which I don't think you will, maybe you can, but which matter would you address?
It will still be it will have to do with children, basically. But if it's something out of the way where I am now, maybe let me ask directly. Answer directly. If it's something completely new, it will be about youth employment.
You had to think about it. It shows that your passion is centered around children specifically, but
there's a whole lot of things, but that is also something that we can look at, because it's a challenge that we have today, and then that's something that I would find a way of actually addressing.
All right. But if somebody, maybe they're asking about you, let me spin that question around. If somebody wanted to start a new NPO, where are the proper opportunities? What should one target?
How many problems we have in South Africa?
Millions.
Exactly. You just have to find what issue resonates with you and what you're passionate about, and what is it that you think I can make a difference here. Otherwise, there's a whole lot of other things. You can't even say, it's not like a job market where you say, do you want to do IT or medicine?
Sure.
You know? So within medicine, there's a whole lot of other things as well. So that's the same thing with a non-profit organization.
Makes perfect
sense.
It
should resonate with what lies within your heart.
This question is not coming from Mohau. Your question is coming in. He's out in Winterfeld. What are the skill set that I need to start an NPO?
I think I've mentioned that it's all about management. It's all about management. You have to be a people's person, because non-profit, remember, it's about working with people. You should have passion on what you want to do, have a great understanding of the problem that you want to address.
Yeah.
Not just say, I want to do this, I want to address, I want to deal with drug abuse, but you don't have any clue what is that, what is it particular that you want to do. Or do you want to pay for their treatment, these kids, or do you want to build a rehab, or do you want to, whatever that is that you want to do, you really need to be able to know what is it that you want to do. There's different skills, like any other company. If within TUT you've got all these different skills, and that's the same thing with NPO. Like I said to you, you need people who can be able to raise funds. But once you have funds in your organization, who's going to manage that money? You need proper financial management skills within the organization. You're running projects, you need proper management skills. And you need people who actually are passionate about the work that you do. If you have volunteers, like I say, you're not just going to get somebody who can come and volunteer, but somebody that actually will be able to add value to the work that you do.
Yeah.
So with skills, it starts with your passion, and it starts with understanding exactly what is that you want to do. But you require all the skills that is required in the business sector to run this non-profit organization.
Mohau Seboka from Winterfeld is asking, in a very big organization, as a woman in a leadership space, how do you manage your people? Strictly, I can tell. I mean, that laughter gives it away. Sure.
It's about people skills, interpersonal skills, relationship skills. That's where it starts. As much as you can be a professional, you can have your MBA, you can have your degrees and all that, but at the end of the day, it's all about people. You need to have that people skills. I think that's the core.
So you don't actually need, because I don't think we've touched on issues of education. I know you are well studied, but does one need education? As long as you say anybody can start an organization, some would be 18. Surely I don't think they would have studied much. Maybe they are in matric then. Is education that important, quite apart from passion?
Education is very important. But I must tell you, it's not something that you can say people who need to have a degree to start this. Like I said, there's a whole lot of things. We have a lot of good, successful NGOs that have been running for years by women and men who don't have even high school education, but because of the understanding, because education is actually relative. If I say educated, I've read books, but I might be more, you might be learned and I might be more educated.
Okay. It
depends on what is that you want to do. And people learn as you go. We learn every day. Education is important. If you really have to get financial management skills, you need to know what to look for. And you need education to do that, or some form of knowledge. So knowledge is very, very important. Education is very important.
Let me appreciate the questions that are coming in, and I'll go back momentarily before I let you go to the issue of funding. Earlier on, we were talking about government and the relationship thereof that one need to have with them. From a funding perspective, though, which is where the problem, if you've spoken about funding on all the answers you've given us here, from a funding perspective, how does it threaten the sustainability of NPOs, the fact that many of them might be depending on the government's handout, when in fact there might be, I was raising an example of environmentalists and people who are against some of the project that the government is doing, but they are depending on the government for funding. Therefore, chances that they would get funding are few and far between, if you like. From a funding perspective, though, does the fact that it all depends on what the government say, if your proposal is against them, does it threaten the sustainability? Are we likely to see more and more NPOs being whittled down because they seem to be against what the government is proposing in any?
I don't think so. We need people to actually address whatever the government is doing wrong, despite the fact that you are funding me. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it's very important. I mean, we have advocacy groups within the NPO sector who would address a particular issue.
Yeah.
They will look at, say, the issue of human rights. If there's something that is done to violate that, they will say that. And fortunately, most of the advocacy groups actually get a lot of their funding from international donors. Yes. But that doesn't stop a small organization to raise issues. I mean, that's one of the things. You're not only here to supplement or to augment what the government's supposed to be doing, but it's also to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
So you have to raise those issues. And what is more important is relying on funding, and because of relying on government funding, you can't actually be against, or if you're against, you fear of losing the funds. That's why it's very, very, very important for non-profit organizations to not solely rely on government funding.
Yeah.
That's why you need to go out, approach the corporates. There's a whole lot of companies actually, I think corporates funds a lot of NGOs more than the government does, because now they have their own CRI space where they're actually looking at addressing those governments. Have more funding so that you can also have leverage. You shouldn't be afraid to say, address a matter, and then you know that tomorrow a minister will be very upset with you, and then they will pull a plug on you.
Yeah, sure.
You should be very independent and sustainable. That's where the issue of sustainability comes in. You don't rely on, you need multiple streams of income to survive.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. And maybe that's where we'll leave it. And I was asking that question because I remember with Gwadamantashe, who reminded some of the organizations, check where you're getting your funding. At that time, they were opposed to the environment issues with some of the minings and all that jazz. Listen, you've been very great. How do people, for those, I mean, before I let you go, how do people get hold of you, for those who might find the need to have a conversation with you outside this, for anything we've missed at all? Somebody who need advice with starting an NPO, maybe get that step by step journey with you. How do they get?
They can get me on my number, 064 945 5366.
Repeat that number again. I think it's very important.
064 945 5366. And my email is belamontom@gmail.com.
There you go.
They can also get to our Facebook page. It's Bongwanake Foundation, and they can just send in a message from there. But I am willing and be very happy to assist those people that want to start their NPOs, or the nascent one that just started and they feel stuck.
Belinda Mogashwa, the Executive Director of Bongwanake Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right,
Thank you.
The Groundbreakers, Mondays to Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. on TUTFM.